Following on from the Fokker F-28 Fellowship, an airliner that, while a notable success on the global market for regional jets, failed to meet the forecasts hoped by the Dutch sales team, we take a look now at its successor, the Fokker 100 and the Fokker 70, two models built to adapt the near 20-year-old design for the tastes and demands of the 1980s, as short-field operations began to become a major part of commuter services across the world, though sadly, despite much promise, neither the 100 or the 70 would be able to save the Fokker company from falling ultimately into bankruptcy. The Fokker 100 project, known originally as the F-28 Mark 0100, first began development in 1983 in the wake of the ultimately fruitless Fokker F-29 project, which itself was intended as a replacement for the F-28 but was unable to find a suitable partner firm with which to develop the airliner due to Fokker's own lack of capital and production floor space at their Schiphol factory, thus leading to its abandonment in 1981. The F-28 itself, while seeing a late bloom in its commercial performance following deregulation of the American airline market, looking severely out of step by the turn of the 1980s when compared to a new breed of short takeoff and landing regional jets such as the British Aerospace or BAE 146 of 1981, a thoroughly modern concept that was successfully able to rob a large portion of sales from the F-28 during its latter years, Fokker determining that the proven F-28 airframe, specifically that of the F-28 Mark 4000, would make the perfect basis for a new generation of regional jet, incorporating the same rear-mounted twin-jet engines and T-tail configuration, while also including a fully updated flight control suite and improved power plants. Formally launched on March 25, 1983, the Fokker 100 project comprised enlarging the F-28 Mark 4000 design through an 18-foot 10-inch fuselage stretch, a wingspan increase of 9 foot 10 inches, and a horizontal stabilizer span increase by 4 foot 7 inches, the fruits of which resulted in passenger capacity being increased from 85 to 109, while the Rolls-Royce high bypass ratio TAE Mark 620-15 and the more powerful Mark 650-15 were offered as replacements to the original Rolls-Royce Spey Mark 555-15 and 15H power units. Other improvements to the airframe including new flaps with extended leading and trailing edges that continue to eschew leading-edge slats so as to reduce complexity, and a maximum weight increase through the strengthening of the landing gear and improvements to the braking systems, the improved wing illustrating a 30% increase in efficiency when flying at cruising altitude. While internally, the Fokker 100 received the Rockwell Collins DU-1000 EFIS or Electronic Flight Information System that provided an FMS or Flight Management System, Autopilot Flight Director, Thrust Management Systems, Electronic Flight Instrument Displays, AR Inc. or Aeronautical Radio Incorporated, and Cat-3 Autoland systems. Following the announcement of the Fokker 100 in 1983, two prototypes were eventually built, the first taking its maiden flight on November 1, 1986, and was registered Papa Hotel Mike Kilo Hotel, while the second, registered Papa Hotel Mike Kilo Charlie, followed on February 25, 1987. Rigorous testing over the next several months, ultimately leading to airworthiness certification being granted on November 20th of the same year, and the first deliveries were made to launch customer, Swissair, during February 1988. While the lasting legacy of the Fokker F-28's superb performance on the American market for regional hops meant the Fokker 100 was viewed with great enthusiasm by potential customers in the United States, as demonstrated in 1989, when American Airlines placed a $3.1 billion order for 75 Fokker 100s, the largest ever order placed with Fokker, and the largest single commercial purchase ever made for a company based in the Netherlands. Other eager customers including TAM, who ordered 50 units, and US Air, who ordered 40 units. Truly, the Fokker 100 had succeeded where the early examples of the F-28 had failed, providing the marketplace with an efficient and spacious but well-performing airliner that was perfectly suited to the environmental and legislative demands of 1980s aviation, as demonstrated during noise tests conducted at the notoriously stringent John Wayne Airport in California, where it was found that the Fokker 100 presented noise pollution that was substantially less than the renowned BAE 146, which itself had been dubbed the Whisper Jet due to it being the quietest commercial airliner on sale at the time. The arrival of the Fokker 100 onto the marketplace, and its ability to steal sales back from British Aerospace, being one of the primary reasons as to the near bankruptcy of BAE during the 1992 global economic recession. Emboldened by the success of the 100, Fokker, at the request of several airlines that wanted an aircraft that catered to the market that sat between regional turboprops, such as the Fokker 50 and ATR turboprop airliners, and larger jet airliners such as the Boeing 737, Airbus A320, and McDonnell Douglas MD-80, began work during 1991 on a smaller variant of the 100 that would have its fuselage length reduced by 15 foot 2 inches, while the rest of the airframe, wings and empennage, as well as the modernized flight deck, was left as a direct translation of what was found on the Fokker 100, this new airliner also carrying over the same Rolls-Royce Tay 620 power units from the 100, and sported a tail clam air brake as per the earlier Fokker F-28 and the rival BAE 146, wherein the air brake is operated by the halves of the tail cone opening to increase drag and thereby reduce the speed of the aircraft both in flight and on landing. This feature allowing the new aircraft to be compatible with the severe 5.5% glide slope required for landing at London City Airport. The new Fokker jet, dubbed the Fokker 70, was formally launched in November 1992, and on April 4, 1993, the first prototype took to the skies for a 3-hour sortie above the southern Netherlands, followed by hot weather testing in Granada, Spain, which eventually led to airworthiness certification being granted on October 14th of the same year, the certification process having been halved in time due to the many similarities of the Fokker 70 to the larger Fokker 100. The first production Fokker 70 taking its maiden flight in July 1994, but had no customers to serve, as during 1993, proposed launch customer Sempati Air of Indonesia collapsed into bankruptcy, meaning the first unit to be delivered to a customer was in fact an executive model ordered by the Ford Motor Company, which was handed over to the American car builder in October 1994, while the first delivery of a passenger example wouldn't take place until March 1995, when Sempati Air was restarted. As had been the case with the 100, Fokker was very eager to replicate the success of the larger airliner on the American market, but found that the potential for the model was limited by the stringent demands of the Federal Aviation Administration of the USA, as while the Fokker 70 was certified to carry up to 80 passengers in the rest of the world, in the United States, the FAA only certified it for a maximum carriage of 70 passengers, meaning the first and only carrier to order the Fokker 70 in America was Mesa Airlines, a subsidiary of Desert Sun Airlines, who ordered 2 units in December 1993. Fokker, so as to sweeten the deal for North American carriers, agreeing to a clause in the sales contract that gave the carriers the right to return the aircraft to Fokker within 18 months of delivery if not satisfied with their performance, which ultimately led to the 2 Mesa Airlines Fokker 70s being returned to Europe in 1997 as the only aircraft ever operated in North America. In the end, the Fokker 70 struggled to match the sales performance of the Fokker 100 due to its severely restricted capacity, and thus only 47 units were eventually built that operated with notable carriers including Alliance Airlines, Air New Guinea, KLM Cityhopper, Austrian Airlines, and British Midland, the Fokker 70's inability to sell in plentiful numbers only serving to exacerbate the severe financial woes plaguing the Fokker company, thanks in no small part to the investment made in the original Fokker F-28 Fellowship that had never been repaid due to that model's failure to meet sales forecasts, although other major blows to Fokker throughout the previous decade had included the failure of the company to form a suitable tie-up with McDonnell Douglas on the MDF 100 wide-body airliner project, which could have provided a sustained long-term contract, as well as giving the marketplace a wide-body twin-jet model that rivaled the Boeing 767 and Airbus A300, while the company's replacement for the long-running Fokker F-27 Friendship turboprop, the Fokker 50 of 1987, was another commercial bomb due to the market for regional propeller airliners having become saturated with rivals such as the de Havilland Dash 8 and the ATR 42. On the other hand, while the Fokker 100 was a commercial gem for the Dutch builder, successfully winning over large segments of the American market and seeing an overall build-out of 283 units, the reality was that the increase in development cost for the airliner meant potential profits were strangled in a time when they were needed most. And as the 1990s progressed, a new breed of regional jet airliner began to emerge in the form of the Canadair CRJ and the Embraer CRJ, 2 comprehensively new airliner designs that provided efficiency, noise abatement, and capacity that easily matched the Fokker 100 and Fokker 70. Development expenses for the Fokker 100 having jumped from an initial estimate of $500 million to a total of $800 million by the end of the program, due to the fact that what was originally envisaged as a model that would owe 80% of its design to the F-28, with only 20% of the airframe being new additions, ended up being 80% new and 20% carried over from the F-28, much of which was caused by the stringent demands of customers such as Swissair, who required the upcoming model to feature a highly advanced cockpit, including a radio signal guidance system that would allow for landings in heavy fog, while US Air asked for aircraft to be delivered with a polished and unpainted skin, the spiraling finances of the Fokker 100 program, thus requiring the Dutch government to step in with a state subsidy of $750 million, while also acquiring a 32% share in the company. However, while Fokker had been saved briefly from collapse by the sales success of the 100, the 1992 global economic recession hit the builder hard, not only losing the company a prospective customer in the form of the 6th revival of American airline Braniff, who collapsed into administration in July 1992 after only 2 months of operation, but saw a general slowdown in the purchase of new airliners overall, once again pushing the firm to the edge of bankruptcy and demanding a merger with a more secure partner in order to save its future, Fokker eventually merging with Daimler-Benz of Germany and its aerospace division Dassault during 1993, who procured a 51% share in the company, while the Dutch government upped its own share to 49%, though the reality was that the Dutch state preferred to take a hands-off approach to the running of Fokker, and thus left the management to figure out their financial problems on their own, while Daimler-Benz reportedly poured upwards of $2 billion worth of investment into the general day-to-day operation of the aircraft builder between 1994 and 1996. Fokker's stumble with the likes of the 50 and the 70, together with a drop-off in sales for the Fokker 100, seeing their profits turn rapidly into losses, with the 1993 fiscal year seeing a negative net income of $122 million reported, while 1994 saw this figure increase to a negative net income of $358 million. Desperate to save itself, Fokker implemented a severe cost-cutting program following the Daimler-Benz merger, with 1,900 jobs cut and the yearly aircraft output lowered from 60 to 40 units due to the lack of demand not being enough to sustain a comprehensive build rate, while for 1995, a restructuring effort was launched, with the goal being for the company to break even in 1996, which included several plant closures and the renegotiation of supplier contracts on a case-by-case basis, though by the turn of 1996, Daimler-Benz had become impatient with the Dutch firm as to its inability to produce results, and having spent enough money on the builder, the German giant pulled out of Fokker during the same year, leading the company to desperately seek new partners for financial stability, one of whom was the South Korean electronics company Samsung, who approached the company and the Dutch government to purchase a controlling share of the manufacturer, Samsung making 2 appeals to purchase the aircraft builder, the second of which incorporated 3 additional companies, car builders Daewoo and Hyundai, and the shipping firm Hanjin, so as to create a conglomerate to save the Dutch manufacturer, while Russian aircraft builder Yakovlev also made brief notions as to procuring the Dutch company. Ultimately, though, nothing could be done to save Fokker from its eventual collapse, the final nail coming during November 1996, when long-time wing supplier for the F-28 and later Fokker 70 and 100, Short Brothers of Belfast, was sold by parent firm Bombardier to Spirit Aerosystems, who promptly shut down the production of the wings and the undercarriage doors for Fokker's aircraft, meaning the new owners would have had to either pay a hefty fee to restart the production or find someone else to build the aircraft's wings, leading, inevitably, to Fokker itself being wrapped up on May 15, 1997, ceasing production of all products and bringing an end to one of the world's earliest aircraft manufacturers after 85 years of trading, some of the more profitable parts of the company being sold on at bankruptcy auction, where they would continue the Fokker name outside of whole-scale aircraft production, as was the case with Fokker Technologies, a subsidiary of GKN that still produces lightweight aircraft structures, wiring harnesses, and landing gears for aircraft manufacturers, as well as providing maintenance contracts for Fokker aircraft operators. The only other mutterings of a potential revival for the Fokker brand being when the Netherlands Aircraft Company proposed a new regional jet airliner project dubbed the Fokker 130 during the mid-2010s, which would compete with the Airbus A220, Embraer E2, and Mitsubishi SpaceJet families, though after much initial hype, this scheme subsequently went quiet, with no word on progress as of 2023. With regard to accidents, the Fokker 100 was involved in 11 accidents, resulting in the deaths of 207 people, while the Fokker 70 was involved in only 1 incident with no injuries reported, the first accident relating to the 100 taking place on March 5, 1993, when PAL Air Macedonian Airlines Flight 301, operating from Skopje in Macedonia to Zurich in Switzerland, crashed shortly after takeoff, leading to the deaths of 83 of the 97 people aboard, the cause being attributed to the accumulation of ice on the wings and the failure to adhere to the correct procedure for handling atmospheric icing. The worst accident involving the Fokker 100 took place on October 31, 1996, when TAM Flight 402, operating from Sao Paulo to Recife via Rio de Janeiro, crashed into a heavily populated area of Sao Paulo shortly after takeoff, when the reverse thruster on the starboard engine was deployed inadvertently due to a short circuit, while improper training of the crew meant they were unable to recover the stricken airliner when it stalled and rolled sharply over to the right, leading to the deaths of all 95 aboard the aircraft and a further 4 on the ground. The Fokker 100 has also been involved in 2 incidents where explosive decompression of the cabin occurred that ejected at least 1 passenger either fully or partially from the aircraft, the first being on July 9, 1997, when TAM Airlines Flight 283 was damaged by a bomb placed in the rear cabin that blew a 3.5 square meter hole in the fuselage and seeing 1 passenger sucked out of the plane, although despite the devastation, the aircraft was able to land safely, while on September 15, 2001, TAM Flight 9755, suffered an uncontained engine failure that shattered 3 of the cabin windows and caused a passenger to be sucked partially from the aircraft, the Fokker being able to land safely, though the passenger would tragically succumb to his injuries. One of the more outlandish incidents involving the Fokker 100 took place on February 18, 2013 at Brussels Airport, when a Fokker 100 operated by Helvetic Airways was robbed by 8 gunmen who entered the apron in vehicles disguised as police cars and stole approximately $50 million worth of diamonds and money that was being loaded into the aircraft from an armoured car, the thieves subsequently escaping without a shot being fired, while the latest incident involving the Fokker 100 took place on December 27, 2019, when Bec Air Flight 2100 lost altitude on takeoff from Almaty International Airport and struck a nearby concrete barrier and a building, leading to the deaths of 12 people, the accident being attributed to the failure of Bec Air to conduct critical maintenance procedures and their failure to inspect for ice formation prior to takeoff. The only accident involving the Fokker 70 took place on January 5, 2004, when Austrian Airlines Flight 111 from Vienna to Munich crashed into a snowy field short of the runway at Munich due to the airliner suffering an engine failure on approach, the reason as to the loss of power being caused by the ingestion of icing, although thankfully no one was injured in this incident and the airliner was recovered, repaired and returned to work. In the end, the Fokker F-28 and its Fokker 170 successors proved to be both the best and worst things to happen to the Dutch builder, as while all of these aircraft were superbly built, well-designed and incredibly efficient machines that plied their trade across the globe, the reality was that in order to keep these models competitive with the likes of Boeing, McDonnell Douglas, British Aerospace and Airbus, the builder needed production facilities that would allow for mass assembly on a scale that would satisfy customers quicker without having to implement the premiums set on the retail price of the F-28, the fatal flaw that led to this pioneering model in the realm of regional jets not being the monumental success it had the potential to be, the fiscal ramifications of the F-28's failure to meet sales forecasts being ones that would cast a dark shadow over the subsequent Fokker 100 and Fokker 70 during the 1980s and 90s, as while the 100 found modest success across the globe, particularly in the United States. The 70 was a dead loss that weighed heavily on Fokker's already sensitive finances, which, in combination with the global economic recession of 1992 and the rise of more modern competitors with thoroughly updated underpinnings, meant the Dutch firm fell into a black hole from which it could not be saved regardless of how much investment its corporate partners put in, thereby bringing down the curtain on one of the oldest of the original aircraft manufacturers.